great hall of Ironmoon was built to make men feel small. Its stone walls rose so high that torchlight could barely reach the ceiling. Banners of black and silver hung from iron hooks, and the floor was cold granite that swallowed the sound of footsteps. It was the kind of room designed for power, not for feeling. On the night everything changed, Alpha King Caden Voss stood at the center of that hall, and every soul in the room held their breath. He was tall and broad, with dark hair that fell slightly over his forehead, and eyes the color of deep forest, green and unreadable. He had ruled Ironmoon since the age of 22, and in 8 years, no one had ever seen him waver. Not in battle, not in court, not once. But that night, something was different. The people in the hall could feel it, even if they could not name it. There was a tension in his jaw that had not been there before, a tightness behind his eyes. A woman stood before him, her wrists bound with rope, her chin lifted. Her name was Lyra Ashvale. She wore a simple gray dress, and her dark brown hair was loose around her shoulders. She did not look like a criminal. She looked like someone who had made peace with something painful, and was standing very still inside that peace. Caden looked at her for a long moment. Then he opened his mouth and said 5 words. "She means nothing to me." The hall exhaled. Lyra closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again. She did not cry. She had already cried everything she had. She was escorted out of the hall by 2 guards, and the great doors closed behind her. Caden turned back to his court, his face composed, his eyes empty. His wolf, however, was not composed. Deep inside him, in that place where his animal instinct lived and breathed, something was breaking apart. It pressed against his ribs. It clawed at the walls he had built inside himself. It made a sound he refused to hear. He walked to his throne and sat down, and he began the business of being a king. 3 years before that night, Caden had been different. Not soft. He had never been soft, but there had been something alive in him that later would go quiet. He had a younger brother named Ren, 20 years old and full of light. Ren laughed easily and argued about everything, and followed Caden around like a shadow made of sunshine. He was not built for war, but he trained anyway, because he wanted to stand beside his brother. Caden loved Ren in the way that older brothers sometimes love the people they feel responsible for. Fiercely, quietly, with very little said out loud. And then there was Lyra. She had come to his camp during a routine border patrol, called in to treat a soldier who had taken a bad wound to his leg. She was not royalty. She was not even a ranked member of any pack. She was a healer from the borderlands, the daughter of a miner family, with the rare ability to feel another wolf's pain as if it were her own. Caden had watched her work from across the tent, and she had not noticed him at first. She was entirely focused on the man in front of her, speaking to him in a low, steady voice, her hands calm and careful. The soldier visibly relaxed under her touch. When she finally looked up and saw the Alpha King watching her, she did not bow immediately. She met his eyes first, just for a second, and something happened in that second that neither of them knew how to explain. His wolf sat up straight for the first time in his life. It pressed forward, alert and certain, as if it had been waiting for this exact moment, without ever knowing it was waiting. Lyra felt it too. He could see it in the way the color changed in her face, not embarrassment, but recognition. The quiet shock of finding something you did not know you were looking for. They did not speak that evening, but Caden came back the next day, and the day after that, and eventually they were talking in low voices while the camp moved around them, and weeks passed, and he understood that she had become necessary. He never told her what she was to him. He was a king, and kings did not speak of such things easily. But he came to her whenever duty allowed, and she came to him, and in those hours, he was not a ruler. He was just a man who could breathe. His wolf was content for the first time in memory. It settled inside him, warm and calm, like something that had finally come home. The ambush happened at dawn. They were moving through a valley at the eastern edge of Ironmoon's territory, a small company of men on a diplomatic errand, when the attack came from 3 sides at once. It was precise. It was planned. Someone had known exactly where they would be. The fight was short and brutal. When the smoke settled and the attackers had fled, Caden found Ren on the ground, barely breathing. He knelt beside his brother in the mud and held him, and Ren looked up at him with eyes that were already going dim, and said his name once. Then he was gone. Caden did not move for a long time. His men stood around him in silence. The valley was very quiet. Later, the report came in. The attack had been traced back to a man named Doran Ashvale, a disgraced elder who had been stripped of his rank years ago and who had since turned to working with criminal packs along the border. He had coordinated the ambush. He had known the route because someone had told him. Doran Ashvale, Lyra's uncle. Caden's advisors stood in his private chamber that evening and watched him carefully as they delivered the information. They were men who understood power and politics, who knew how to read a room, and they read this one perfectly. "The connection is clear," one of them said. "The Ashvale name is a danger to the crown. Any association with that bloodline will be seen as weakness. The people will question your judgment." Caden said nothing. "She may not have known directly," another added carefully, "but the family connection cannot be ignored. To do nothing would invite doubt." He still said nothing. But grief, in certain men, does not stay soft for long. It does not ask for comfort. It looks for somewhere to put itself, something to do, something that feels like action. And action, in a king, can be terrifying. He told himself he was protecting Iron Moon. He told himself it was duty. His wolf told him it was a lie. He stopped listening to his wolf. Lyra had heard nothing of the ambush when the guards came for her. She had been preparing remedies in her small workspace near the edge of camp when the doors opened and 2 armored men told her she was wanted in the Great Hall. She walked with them because she trusted him. Even when she saw the hall full of people, even when she saw the way they looked at her, she thought there had been some mistake that he would explain. When she saw his face, she understood. Not the reason. She did not yet know about her uncle or about Ren. She understood only that something had already been decided, and she had not been part of the decision. She stood straight while they listed the charges. She kept her face calm while the room watched her, and when Caden said those 5 words, "She means nothing to me," she let them land without flinching, because to flinch would be to fall apart, and she would not do that in front of a king who had already chosen to let her be destroyed. They took her to the border and set her loose with nothing but the clothes she wore and a single day's worth of food. She walked. The wolf inside Caden did not rage loudly. It did not tear at things or howl. It simply began, very slowly, to go quiet. He noticed it first during the next full moon, when he went to shift and felt resistance, a heaviness, like trying to move through deep water. He pushed through it eventually, but the run was joyless, mechanical. He returned early and stood in his chamber alone, breathing hard for reasons that had nothing to do with exertion. Over the following months, the shifts became harder. Then they stopped happening naturally at all. He had to force them, and they lasted only minutes before he felt exhausted. His healers examined him and found nothing physically wrong. His generals assumed he was overworked. His advisors said nothing because they did not want to know. But a wolf that has recognized its true mate and then rejected that mate does not simply move on. The bond is not a feeling that can be discarded. It is something that runs deeper than emotion, deeper than choice. When it is severed from one side, the wound does not close. It stays open, quietly, forever. Caden ruled. He won 2 wars in the years that followed. He expanded Iron Moon's borders and filled its treasury, and sat in the great hall where he had once destroyed the only good thing that had ever been his, and he made decisions, and he signed documents, and he went to bed in an empty room every night. He did not sleep well. He dreamed, sometimes, of hands that knew how to be still. He dreamed of a voice that was low and steady and calm. He woke from those dreams before they could show him a face, because some part of him understood that if he let himself see her face, he would not be able to keep going the way he was going. He kept going. The scout's report came on an ordinary evening, delivered without ceremony by a young man who did not understand what he was carrying. A woman named Lyra Ashvale had established a healing clinic in the eastern borderlands. She operated without pack affiliation, without rank, and without payment requirements. She treated anyone who came to her, rogues, displaced wolves, those who had been cast out from their packs for reasons that had nothing to do with their worth as people. She had built something real out of nothing, in the place where she had been abandoned. She had also, 3 years ago, submitted a formal document to the Neutral Council, a full record of her Uncle Doran's activities, including evidence that proved she had had no contact with him in over a decade and no knowledge of his plans. The document had been received and then buried. 2 of Caden's senior advisors had ensured it never reached him. Lyra had been innocent. She had been innocent from the beginning, and the people closest to him had known it and said nothing, and he had been too consumed by grief and rage to ask the right questions. There was one more thing in the report. A border lord named Grieve had recently begun courting her. Steady man, older, well-regarded. Not her true mate. Nothing in the report said that, but Caden knew it without needing to be told, because he was her true mate, and that was not a title that could be transferred. His wolf surfaced for the first time in 2 years. Not with energy, not with hope, with grief, raw and enormous, like something surfacing from very deep water after a very long time. Caden sat alone in his chamber for the rest of the night, and in the morning he made a decision. He rode east without guards, without his crown, without ceremony. Just a man on a horse moving through the quiet early morning. He found her clinic easily. The building was modest but well kept, and there were already people waiting outside when he arrived. A young wolf with a bandaged arm, an older woman sitting patiently on a wooden bench. They looked at him with curiosity, but no alarm. He tied his horse and went inside. She was kneeling beside a child, setting a splinted ankle with careful hands, speaking in the same low, steady voice he remembered. She did not look up immediately. She finished what she was doing, said something that made the child smile, and then stood and turned. She went very still when she saw him. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The room felt small around them. Caden was aware that he was breathing too carefully, managing himself the way he always managed himself in difficult situations. Except this was not a difficult situation in the political sense. This was simply the hardest thing he had ever done. "I know the truth," he said. "I know about the document. I know about my advisors. I know you were innocent." She looked at him steadily. Her eyes were calm. He had expected anger. He had prepared himself for anger. The calm was harder. "I am sorry," he said, "for what I did, for what I said, for not asking the right questions when I should have, for choosing to believe the worst, because it was easier than grieving properly." He paused. Then, because he was standing in front of the only person who had ever made him feel like a whole person rather than a function, he said the true thing. "My wolf never stopped knowing who you are. I never stopped knowing. I told myself I had made peace with it. I had not made peace with anything." Lyra was quiet for a long moment. A door opened somewhere in the back of the clinic, and then closed again. Outside, a bird called once and went silent. "I know your wolf knows," she said finally. Her voice was even, measured, as if she had thought about this conversation many times and had decided exactly how she wanted to move through it. "I can feel it. I could always feel it, even after everything. That never went away." She looked at him for another moment, and something passed through her expression, not forgiveness exactly, but recognition. The same recognition from that first evening in the tent, still present after everything, because some things do not disappear just because you want them to. "But Caden," she said, "you are not your wolf. Your wolf chose me on instinct. You made your choice with a full mind. You have to live inside that." She asked him to leave before Grieve returned. He left. Back in Iron Moon, Caden dismantled the men who had buried the truth. He did it methodically and thoroughly, without anger in his face, though the anger was there. He issued a public statement that cleared Lyra's name entirely, and documented every detail of the deception that had been carried out in his court. He sent funds to her clinic, with no letter attached, no request for acknowledgement, no strings of any kind. He did not contact her again. His wolf returned, but it was changed, quieter, more careful, like something that had been through a long winter, and had come out the other side knowing things it had not known before. It walked with him. It no longer fought him, but it carried something it would always carry, a knowledge of what had been possible, and what had been lost. Caden became, in the years that followed, a fairer king than he had ever been in the years of his ambition. He listened longer before deciding. He asked more questions. He understood, in a way he had not understood before, that grief is not an excuse, and power is not a defense, and that the most important choices a person makes are often the ones made in the worst moments. Lyra married Grieve in the spring. The ceremony was small and quiet, attended by the people she had built her clinic with, and the families she had helped. She wore a pale blue dress and carried flowers from her own garden. Grieve looked at her with steady, uncomplicated warmth, and she let herself be looked at that way. She was not what she might have been with someone else, in another life. But she was present, and she was whole, and she had built everything around her with her own hands, and that was something no one could take from her. On the night of her wedding, in a palace far across the territory, a king climbed to the roof and sat beneath a full moon. He did not shift, he simply sat, under the wide, cold sky, and let himself feel everything he had spent years refusing to feel. All of it came at once, the grief and the guilt and the loss and the years of silence and the dreams he had cut short before they could show him her face. His wolf sat beside him and was quiet. There were no words for what they had lost. There was only the moon above them, patient and indifferent, and the long night ahead, and the fact that tomorrow he would still be king and still have to keep going. He breathed. He kept going. Some losses do not have lessons. They are simply losses, permanent and honest, and the only thing left to do is live carefully enough afterward that the loss means something, that it changes you into someone who deserves the life still left ahead. Caden Voss learned that too late to change the outcome. He learned it just in time to become someone worth being. It was not enough. It was all he had. He made it count.